Welcome to the Module 1 overview from your textbook, The ABCs of Relationship Selling Through Service. In this module, we'll be focusing on selling as a profession. This overview of Module 1 will cover the following areas. We will start with a brief introduction to selling as a profession. We will then identify the chapters that are involved. We will then look at a brief description of the key learning objectives related to this module. Module highlights will provide us a description of some of the key points raised in the chapters. We will conclude with any readings, assignments, and assessments related to this module. All subsequent module overviews will follow this same format. In Module 1, the focus is on giving you, the student, an overview of selling as a profession. A lot of students, people in general, when asked about whether they consider a career in selling, are often hesitant. And a lot of that is understandable. They've had a very limited exposure to selling. For many of us, it's been our interaction with retail salespeople, whether we were the retail sales clerk or whether we're the customer on the other side. Universities in general have had very little coverage of selling as an area of business. If you wanted to pursue a career as a sales professional, there weren't many courses, there weren't many avenues to really expand your knowledge in an academic setting. So it's understandable that that's limited exposure would create a very point of view, and in many cases a very negative view of what selling is. What we'll see is that selling is a very time-honored and noble profession, and it's a very vast profession. It includes areas from sales clerk right up to sales executive. Each of these areas involves their own area of expertise and knowledge. Module 1 looks at a variety of selling careers and some of the different rewards and challenges that each one of these careers offers. And we'll look at a variety of different types of settings, whether it be retail, nonprofit, business-to-business selling. All of these areas require a certain level of knowledge and skill. And what we'll see is that the selling skills that we acquire can be adapted to each of these settings. The chapters covered in Module 1 are as follows. Chapter 1, which talks about the life, times, and career of the professional salesperson. And Chapter 14, which deals with retail, business-to-business, services, and nonprofit selling. In a course like Professional Selling Skills, it's designed to appeal to a very broad audience, from someone with no sales experience and maybe considering a career in sales, to someone who's thinking of starting up their own business but doesn't have a lot of selling experience and needs to develop those skills, to someone who actually is in sales but is looking to refresh and update their selling skills. So if we look at Chapter 1, it appeals to this broad audience. It covers areas like what is professional selling. I mean, we all have a concept of what it is. But this chapter gives us a clear identification of the role of professional selling. It also talks about why one would want to choose a career in sales and some of the rewards and challenges of a sales career. Also covered are relationship selling, the concept, and the different and varied roles of a sales career. Sales can range from an entry-level clerk, sales clerk type role, right up to sales account executive. And also talks about how the selling process can be instrumental in building relationships. Chapter 14 focuses on the different areas of selling: retail, business, services, and nonprofit. And it talks about the different buying processes in each. Also, it talks about the challenges posed in each of these areas. So there are some very clear learning objectives associated with Module 1, specifically chapters 1 and 14. Remember, these chapters form a fundamental background to your study of sales going forward. So specifically regarding chapter 1, you should be able to define and explain the term selling. Now, I know we all have an idea, general idea of what it is, but after having studied chapter 1, you'll have a clear definition of professional selling and its role. You should also be able to explain the idea that everyone sells, whether you're professionally employed in sales or not. It's a life skill. You should be able to discuss the reasons that people might want to choose a career in sales, and identify the many different types of sales jobs and discuss their responsibilities. You should be able to discuss the rewards inherent in a sales career and the challenges. And you should be able to define the characteristics that are needed for success in building relationships with customers, which is so vital. You'll also be able to list and explain the 10 steps in the selling process. After having studied chapter 14, you should be able to discuss the importance of personal selling in retailing, and also describe the retail selling process itself. You should be able to confidently discuss the differences between business and consumer products and their markets. And you should be able to explain what an RFP is and how to respond to one. You should be able to explain the steps business purchasing agents use in buying decisions, and also the various influences on a purchase decision beyond just the purchasing agent. You should be able to explain the differences between services and nonprofit selling. You should be able to discuss the term crowdfunding as it relates to nonprofit selling. The following are some highlights of Chapter 1 in Module 1. You know, there's an old saying, nothing happens until a sale is made, and that's so true. You can have the shiniest machinery, you can have the flashiest information systems and resources, but until somebody sells something, you go out of business. So selling is what starts everything in the process. It is the driving mechanism of commerce. It is the key to sustaining a healthy free market economy. And when you think of it, selling is an old and honorable profession. It's been around for many, many years. And selling has been instrumental in raising the world's standard of living. When you think of it, when things get sold, money circulates, people get employed, businesses expand, trade expands, and the overall wealth of a country increases. Millions have chosen sales as a career, largely because of the availability of sales positions. There's a lot of them. They've always have been. Even in the Great Depression, when jobs in general were very scarce, sales jobs were relatively plentiful because companies realized that even in those dire conditions, they had to sell to survive. Now, it was a much different world then, but they realized they had to sell to survive. And over time, technologies and social media have really moved the sales profession and transformed it in major ways. And we'll see that that has major impact on what's expected of salespeople today and their role today. Nobody is born a salesperson. Now, you may think that, and you may hear people say, oh, this guy was born a salesperson, he's got the gift of gab, he can, do anything and smooth talk people. It's not true. The best salespeople in the world didn't originally think of themselves as salespeople. What they had was the desire to succeed, the optimistic attitude that they can succeed, and the drive for hard work to succeed. It takes plenty of hard work and determination and desire to succeed, but if you have it, you can. And businesses have realized that training is the key to success. It wasn't long ago where it was very difficult to get formal sales training. I remember my years in university many years ago, where if you wanted to study sales in university or college, there weren't any courses. You could study marketing, you could go work for a company and learn things on the job, and maybe take some company training, but there was no real formal sales training at the college or university level as there is today. So over time, it's been realized that selling is indeed a profession. It's just not some job you do if you can't do something else. In fact, when you think of it, salespeople manage the most vital asset a company will ever have, and that's the relationship with its customers. Because if that's not there, it doesn't matter what products you sell, what machinery, what distribution systems you have, you will fail. So that relationship, that interface with your customers is the most crucial asset you have, and that cannot be trusted to amateurs. So companies realize that, and one of the biggest areas of training investment today, one would think, well, it's technical training or it's sales training. Sales training is a huge area of any training budget for companies today. And here's a statistic that will really maybe surprise you. Fewer than 10% of sales managers and salespeople out in the field today have less than 8 days of sales training, formal sales training. The type of training you will be receiving in this course, for example. So it's an area of growth, and it's an area that a lot of companies now are realizing needs to be exploited and developed. And what we'll see is that salespeople need to develop a range of skills through study and practice, enhancing those abilities to think strategically and relate to others, planning capabilities, organizational capabilities, understanding how business works and how finance works are key abilities now that salespeople need. Gone are the days where you walk in and you give a canned spiel and you hope that something is going to stick and there you go. Today, companies want trusted advisors. They want people who understand them, understand their business, understand how to make them more competitive and give them an advantage. And to do that, you really have to be a consultant to their business. So product knowledge, company knowledge, industry knowledge, knowledge of how to plan, organize is very vital, very crucial to sales success. And another thing that we'll learn in this chapter is that the sales process is a process, and it's comprised of 10 essential steps. Each of these steps works to help strengthen the relationship with your customer. The following are module highlights of Chapter 14. While salespeople work in a variety of industries, such as retail, what we commonly call the B2C marketplace, business to consumer, they also work in the industrial marketplace, what we commonly call the B2B marketplace, business to business. And they work in the services market as well as the non-for-profit sector. Regardless of what segment they work in, most of the fundamentals of selling remain the same, no matter what is being sold. So selling skills are very portable, and they need to be adapted to all kinds of situations. If we look at the retail sales situation, for example, the retail salesperson's job activities are certainly going to vary from store to store. Yet they usually include things like making error-free transactions, contacting customers, following up with them, handling complaints, accessory selling, stock replenishment, and personal selling. So it's very important for a retail salesperson to be knowledgeable, to be courteous, to be helpful, to be able to make suggestions on what else the customer should be considering with what it is they're interested in, and certainly to be very accurate in terms of the transactions that are made so that they're error-free. If we look at the business marketplace, the B2B marketplace, there's certain characteristics that define this market. In other words, business users buy for a variety of reasons, basically three main reasons. The first scenario that they would buy is for the purchase of raw materials or component products or semi-processed goods that they will need to be able to use in making a higher level assembly or end product. For example, a Dell computer will buy computer chips, will buy batteries, will buy screens. These are component products that they need because they need to put them together to produce the ultimate end product, which is their laptop or their tablet. So these are what we call component parts or semi-processed goods that are used to ultimately be configured together to make a higher level assembly or ultimate end product. Another scenario in the business-to-business marketplace would be to sell to consumer or other industrial users. Think of this as the reseller market. This is where a manufacturer might sell to a wholesaler, who in turn sells to a distributor, who in turn sells to a retailer. So each time this product there's probably some value added occurring, there's some markup occurring, and that product is being resold. So this whole chain of reselling is part of this, what we call B2B marketplace. A third B2B scenario would be where products are bought to conduct one's business. So for example, a Bell Canada would buy furniture because they need it for their offices, they need it for their boardrooms, etc. They need it to conduct their business. A Sobeys grocery chain might buy point of sale systems, we used to call cash register systems, because they obviously need it to conduct their business operations. So that's a third scenario that falls under the business-to-business segment, as it were. One of the another characteristic of the producer or business-to-business marketplace is that really there's three distinct characteristics of this marketplace. And one is that demand is derived. And what that means is that demand is linked to consumer demand for other products. So again, if we use the Dell computer example, Dell makes laptops, they make desktops, they make a variety of equipment. But any of these end-use products are comprised of components. So as Dell sells more laptops, for example, that's going to result in a corresponding increase in demand for the components that went into that product. So demand increase at the consumer end, which is the laptop, is going to set off a wave of increased demand through the channel for the component parts that made up that product. Another characteristic of the B2B marketplace is inelastic demand. And that is that demand does not change in direct proportion to a change in price. So what that really basically means is, again, if we look at it, and we'll use the Dell example as well, is that any component part of that laptop, let's say, let's make that a memory chip or whatever, is usually not a major price component in the overall scheme of things. So if there is a change in price to a memory chip, it's not going to result in a corresponding change in price in the end product. There may be some change, obviously, along the way, but it won't be a corresponding proportional change. Why? Because each component part is usually a relatively small percentage of the overall end product price. A third characteristic of the B2B marketplace is joint demand. And basically what that means is, again, if you look at an increase in demand at the consumer end for an end product, is going to result in an increase in demand for all the components that went into that product. So General Motors sells more cars, that's going to result in an increase in demand for the various parts that come together to make that car, be that tires, glass, batteries, etc. So these are some of the characteristics of the B2B marketplace. Among some of the other characteristics of this marketplace is around buying decisions. Buying decisions in the business environment tend to be more complex and more matrixed. What that means is that the larger the company you're selling to, the more people you're going to have to talk to, the more people you're going to have to influence, the more people are going to have a say in what gets bought. Some of these people are going to look at your solution from a user perspective. Some of these people are going to look at your solution from a financial perspective. Some of these people are going to look at your solution from a technical perspective. And somebody ultimately is going to have to make the decision on what gets bought. Now, your book talks about all these different buying influences in the chapter, so I'm not going to go through each one of them here. It talks about people like initiators, deciders, gatekeepers, buyers, users. All of these are people that play a certain role in the purchase decision process. And these are all people that are looking at your solution from their own personal perspective. So again, one of the areas that we'll be talking about more and getting more familiar with as we go. Some of the other characteristics of selling to business buyers is that decisions tend to take longer because they're more complex. A lot of times customers are going to be wanting to tender the business, i.e. put it out for request for proposal, which is what we call RFP. There's going to be more approvals that need to be done and so on. So it generally takes longer, more lengthy, and it's more complex. Just some of the other things here. The business buying process usually involves 8 steps. And depending on whether it's a new task or a modified rebuy or a straight rebuy, will depend on which steps get emphasized more than the other. I won't go into a lot of detail here because this is amply described in your textbook, and we will be discussing it in the class. But basically, your book talks about 3 different buying processes that businesses tend to use. One is what we call new task. And new task is for situations that tend to be new to a company. Maybe they're buying a new technology, or they're buying, and there's some new job that requires them to go back and buy technology that perhaps they haven't used before in the past, or they have used, but it's been so long that it's essentially new to them now. And this is the most complex and most involved type of scenario, because companies here often need help in terms of shaping what it is they're looking for, what are the requirements. And this is where the sales rep has a very strong role in helping shape buyer preferences and specifications. Another element is what we call the straight rebuy. The straight rebuy is the other end of the scenario. This is where the business has been tendered, somebody won that tender, and now has an agreement with the customer. And straight rebuys are very much like what we call blanket purchase orders. Any additional purchases on that master agreement get added on automatically. So there's already been a price negotiated, there's already been delivery schedules worked out, so we don't need to re-tender business every time we're adding business on. It gets added on based on the master agreement. Think of this as situations involving office supplies. Office supplies are pretty straightforward. They're not very complicated. So customers don't want to have to tender that business every time they want to buy more office supplies. So what they want to do is they tender that business once, somebody wins that business, and then it's usually a multi-year agreement that follows. So if I'm Lyrico or I'm Staples and I happen to win that tender, then I have that business secured for a certain specified period of time. So every time a customer wants to add more supplies, add more paper, add more staples, add more computer ribbons or tapes, they can add based on a agreed to price schedule and delivery schedule. It's often called a blanket PO or blanket purchase order. Same idea. It's put it on my tab. In the middle is what we call a modified rebuy. A modified rebuy is where the customer may already have an agreement with a supplier, but something's changed. Maybe there's some new product or technology or something in which they want to renegotiate or negotiate certain terms to reflect this new situation that wasn't covered by the original agreement. So it's kind of a hybrid between the two. Business buyers, as we said before, often involve different buying influences that we need to talk to and influence, and we need to identify these players. And most business buyers are concerned with how they could make a buck or how they could save a buck. So in other words, how we can make their business more profitable, reduce wastage, reduce costs, or also how we can make them sell more and increase revenue, which is what we call making a buck. The other element of this chapter that we're going to look at is the service sector, and the service sector is really unique in certain ways. Because service is an action or an activity that's done for others for a fee. And one of the things we want to look at here is some of the characteristics that are germane to services. One is that they're intangible, right? We can't see, we can't smell, we can't bounce, we can't touch services, but we can certainly see the effects of them. I can certainly notice someone that's had a bad haircut, or someone that's had some bad work done to their house. So we don't necessarily see the service as a tangible product, but we certainly see the effects of it. So it's important that salespeople realize this and seek ways to sell benefits of the service and try to tangibilize the service in as many ways as they can. For example, somebody selling services to fix a furnace, for example, furnace maintenance. Again, the service itself is intangible, but we can tangibilize it by giving our customers periodic updates or statements that show them what they would have paid had they not been under contract. But because they were under contract, that service was covered and was $0. So it's a way of tangibilizing the benefits of something that is normally intangible. Another characteristic of service is what we call inseparability. Inseparability is essentially that you can't separate the person, the service delivery from the seller. So think of it this way: when I go to a dentist, the dentist provides me the service, and it's also the person who I pay for that service. So the dentist and the service being offered are essentially inseparable. And another way to look at inseparability is the fact that services aren't generally resellable. It's not like a product where I take the product, I sell it to a wholesaler who marks it up or adds something to it and sells it to a distributor, and on down the chain. It's not like that. Services don't usually get resold. They get sold and they get delivered. Another element of service or characteristic is what we call heterogeneity. And what that means is that you can't really standardize the output of service. When we look at products tend to be standard. They're built in a factory under strictly controlled conditions, quality control. So it's fairly straightforward that we expect very consistent, and we usually get very consistent quality from a product because it was produced under controlled conditions. Services very often are not delivered under controlled conditions. They could be delivered under different kinds of environments by different people who have different levels of skills and backgrounds. So it's much harder to guarantee a consistent level of quality when you're dealing with services. Another element of services is perishability, which means essentially that you can't stock or store services. They are consumed as they are delivered. And ultimately, another characteristic is what we call fluctuating demand. Services tend to fluctuate in demand fairly consistently. For example, time of year, time of day often have an impact on demand for services, and sometimes even on how they are priced. You know, some services, the price will go down during the week because demand is generally lower during that time of week. Or airlines will have a seat sale during certain times of year because people don't tend to travel during those particular times. So those things will vary. And the last part is of the chapter deals with non-for-profit organizations. And really, not-for-profit organizations involve selling in their own right. What we're trying to do is convince people to contribute money, to contribute labor, to contribute materials to some particular cause. So it's selling, but on a different level. And they also sell clients on using their services. This brings us to the conclusion of the overview of Module 1. At this point, I'd like to summarize any readings, assignments, and assessments related to this module. As far as readings go, please read chapters 1 and 14 from your textbook. There is a supplementary reading that I would encourage you to read as well. It's entitled Sales is Never Going Back by Boyce and Harrington. It's a very interesting article that talks about the impact of changes in technology and occurrences like the current pandemic on sales. I'd also like you to review the PowerPoints from your text on chapters 1 and 14. There is a video exercise entitled Xerox, Building Customer Relationships, that relates to chapter 1. I'd like you to review the video and answer the questions and submit them. All of this information is in the assignments folder on Slate. In addition, always consult your course calendar and your weekly topical outline in Slate for more details. Thank you.